Welcome to another episode of Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller, and today my co host Evelyn Marcus is not with us. We have just learned the horrendous news of the Bibas young children. The murders, brutal murders of these children at the hands of the Hamas monsters. And these were not the only children who were murdered. We need to remember all of those children. And yet it is encouraging that there are some people, some organizations who are pushing back against the atrocities and the actual participants and their accomplices who helped them to do this murderous day and continue. Today our guest is, I'm going to let her say her own name.
Yael Vias-Gviersman.
Yes, and she is the founder of the and lead investigator, lead attorney, I should say, of October7thjustice.org. She will tell us about her organization's commitment to bringing the perpetrators and their accomplices to justice, the perpetrators of October 7th. So, my first question is, tell us about the foundation of the October 7th organization.
Sure, Phyllis, thank you for having me on this wonderful podcast. I'll tell you before beginning about the organization that actually the Bibas children and their mother were held by the most extreme branch of Hamas. It's a Daesh-like sort of section of Hamas. We know that there were around five Palestinian militias attacking together. They were complicit to this common plan, committing the atrocities of October 7. So I'll tell you about the association. It started on the 7th of October, 6:30 a.m., Saturday morning. I'm waking up in Tel Aviv with my husband and children to sirens, like all of the citizens of Israel. And my sister lives in a kibbutz 9 kilometers from the border. So just to illustrate, 7 kilometers from the border, all settlements and villages and cities were evacuated. So you can imagine 9 kilometers from the border, we were in at least 48 hours of an existential fear for my sister and her family. We were out of communication with them or very scarcely. And we knew people were being murdered on the roads. We couldn't reach them or anything. On the 8th of October, I was contacted by civilian volunteers. There were so many of them who were accompanying the families of the missing and the hostages. And during these first days, there were 3,000 missing persons, Phyllis, 3,000 missing persons for many long weeks. Families who didn't know if their loved ones were dead, kidnapped, taken hostage or alive. And civilians contacted me, first of all, through a human rights lawyer who knows me, to create the connection with the International Red Cross of Tel Aviv office, the ICRC, the legal advisor, which I did, and I thought nothing of again. I went directly back to worrying for my sister and just understanding the atrocities that were unfolding before our eyes, unbelievably so. On the 10th of October, I was contacted again by different citizen volunteers saying they were accompanying many, many families of the missing and hostages and asking me to speak with them to fill in a gap because unimaginably so, no one was speaking with them, not the military, not the police, no authorities were there to speak with them. Of course, authorities were still fighting off the terrorists. They were focusing on identifying the dead and so forth. So, of course, there was a tsunami of needs, and the actual direct victims, their closest families, survivors as well. Communication wasn't there. It was then that I decided I understood the role I have in this unbelievable reality, this hellish reality we woke up to over 500 days ago. And I understood my role, a professional role, I've been working in international criminal law for the past 20 years so international criminal law is about accountability for the worst crimes. Never again is actually the slogan that my profession that I'm exercising. So either as a humanitarian, a prosecutor, a defense attorney for fair trials, or representative of victims of these crimes um, around the world, in Sudan, Darfur, or atrocities committed in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, or Rwanda, Ukraine, former Yugoslavia, and many more. The difference is that today I'm bringing this sort of action and strategic litigation for human rights at home. So this is where, this is home for me, and it's a totally different story. On the 15th of October, I was representing 34 direct victims and survivors, and I had communicated my first communication with the International Criminal Court in The Hague in the name of the victims and survivors of Hamas. And today we're representing over 350 direct victims and survivors who have entrusted us with the task of accountability and effectively implementing their rights to truth, justice, reparations, and never again, so non-repetition. To do this, I established October 7 Justice Without Borders. It's a nonprofit registered under Israeli law and recognized also under US, sort of tax deductible terms.
And what do you hope to accomplish? Kind of take us through your steps.
Yes. So, what do we intend to accomplish when we demand justice, when we demand truth and recognition for the victims? Um, so if I can wrap it up in sort of what this means, it's building on the Nuremberg trials legacy, understanding that certain crimes, they're an assault on humanity as a whole, and they cannot go without accountability. It's something that we cannot suffer.
Let me
And the Nuremberg.
I just want to explain in case there are people young enough that they do not know what we're talking about. The Nuremberg trials were held in Europe after the end of World War II to fair trials to access the culpability. There was the main trial, the culpability of the top Nazis, and then there were many additional trials of the doctors, the guards, etc. Many people don't know that there were additional trials. And
Exactly.
okay, go ahead now.
So these were 12 additional trials. Absolutely, Phyllis. It's important to say, and thank you for sort of making this accessible to everyone, because this has to do because everyone is involved. Everyone is shocked and everyone needs accountability. Accountability is for the direct victims, but it also serves society as a whole. It serves democracies built on the rule of law. So the law saying human rights are at the center of who we are, of our democracies, and certain atrocities, all of society and all of humanity must be so shocked that it has to act. It can't just sit around in our, living room saying, "Oh, this is horrible," and let's continue our day. So many lives have been shattered on that day, and they cannot continue. Till today, they're trying to rebuild, and justice is a necessary step to rebuilding their lives. So we are seeking justice for the victims on the model of the Nuremberg trials legacy. However, this legacy is 8 decades smarter. So it's 8 decades with unfortunately different atrocities committed in different including genocide, including crimes against humanity, including horrific war crimes around the world. We see Russian aggression against Ukraine and so forth. In Syria, we see crimes of Daesh against Yazidis, um, and we should all be revolted by it. We should all be, unacceptable about it. In the same way, we're acting for the victims of Hamas and their accomplices. So atrocities committed by them, they committed atrocities systematically, this intentionally, very cruelly, sadistically, and in a very generalized way in 28 different places are called crime bases in the territory of Israel. And what we're seeking is justice, justice that has holds the victims' rights in the center. So this acknowledgement is an action by states and prosecutors and investigators around the world, um, putting the victims' rights in the center. So acknowledging them, bringing the voice to the victims. Victims, I accompany victims and key witnesses around the world to meet international prosecutors and investigators to simply testify. And this truth that we want to be recognized now in the stage of investigations, we want to achieve prosecutions, fair trials, and eventually convictions so that the perpetrators, direct and indirect, they all bear a responsibility, are named, and they have a, how is it said in English, a sign of Cain, like Cain and Abel,
Yes.
right? The first murder in the Bible. So
Yes.
a sign of Cain. So they cannot walk this earth, you know, unbothered, so that for generations, these individuals will be named, the perpetrators, the victims recognized, the communities that were destroyed recognized as well, so that they can begin their process of healing and rebuilding. And it's very, very important. It's a healing process as well for societies.
So can you give us a very specific example? So I'm still a little
Sure.
confused about what you actually do on the ground, grassroots.
Okay, great. So what does this mean? The first thing, it's several steps. The first step is the contact with the direct victims. So victims can be survivors of the atrocities, meaning the members of kibbutzes, the members of cities. They were attacked directly. They almost burned to death. They were protecting their families for over 20 hours at times. Maybe their first degree members of families were murdered. Maybe their first degree members were taken hostage. So people we represent are either survivors or the murdered and their families, bereaved families, the hostages and their families. And today, out of over 350 of these individuals who have chosen our representation, 44 are hostages who were either released or are still in Gaza. So that's the first step, the contact, the outreach, um, letting victims and survivors understand their rights. What are they entitled to? The second thing is to get them in touch with the very unique and unmatched legal front that we designed at October 7 Justice Without Borders in criminal proceedings, in civil lawsuits, before international courts and national or domestic courts, either on the basis of their nationality. We know that over 40 victims are from over 40 different nationalities. Most of them are double nationalities, Israeli and another nationality, including US citizens, but others are non-Israelis who were just here. They happened to be here on October 7, 2023. So that's the second step. The second step is to connect these victims with their rights through the legal action that we're leading. The legal action is criminal proceedings. In the US and in Israel, we have a very similar justice system where victims have very little space to express their voices. At most, they can be witnesses at their trials, but the prosecutors, the prosecutorial sort of mechanism, they have the full discretion of the indictments, of the arrest warrants, and so forth. In different in different national jurisdictions or international jurisdictions. So, for example, in France or in Italy, in Argentina, in other places, victims can actually trigger the investigations even if the prosecutors don't want to. So, just an example,
Give me
in
an example.
France, in France, the investigative judge, so that's something that doesn't exist in the US and Israeli law, the investigative judge, an independent judge, who is an expert on criminal proceedings, received a call from victims of Assad from Syria, recently former prime minister of Syria. And this investigative judge issued an arrest warrant against Assad while he was still president of Syria. And the prosecutor in France actually appealed that decision. So they went to the appeal court because the prosecutor said, no, 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 that's an acting head of state. He has functional immunity. Same as in our UNRWA case, by the way, which I'll say a word about. So functional immunity means that if you're an official, head of state, or the UN, you can't be investigated or prosecuted for criminal acts. This is true for regular criminal acts, let's say, a regular, God forbid, murder or other violent act, or let's say drunk driving, okay? And that's something states agreed upon with among themselves. However, since Pinochet, so the dictator Pinochet from Argentina, 1990s, the UK, in the UK, a UK court said, well, international crimes, those crimes that humanity united to say never again to, international crimes are above functional immunity. And then comes functional immunity, and then comes regular crimes. So the prosecutor in France said, no, wait, Syria is a state, and Assad is a head of state, so we can't try them. So the appeal court rejected the prosecutor's appeal, and they're now at the highest Supreme Court in France. And we'll see, because the result in that case will influence our might influence our civil lawsuit we're doing with U.S. partners, Law, an American law firm based in Chicago, against UNRWA in New York. So we filed a civil lawsuit with other U.S. lawyers who are expert in filing civil lawsuits against terrorist infrastructure or against crimes against humanity. So we filed this. Wait, I don't know if I should talk about that, Phyllis, because I started telling you about the the criminal proceedings, and I don't want to mix our listeners.
Okay.
Uh, so so maybe we can say our criminal proceedings, our criminal action is in France, it's in Germany. In Germany, it's under universal jurisdiction. That means that anyone of any nationality who's a victim of October 7 attacks can be heard by the German prosecutor for crimes against humanity. So there's a special prosecutor, a national prosecutor in Germany who hears and tries and prosecutes international crimes committed anywhere. Germany already convicted Daesh criminals for crimes committed against Yazidis, including sexual slavery and other atrocities. And our criminal action is also directly at the International Criminal Court. We're very unique in that because we're the only legal entity based in Israel, Israelis, Hebrew speaking, part of this, society that was attacked in Israel, bringing hands-on experience directly at the International Criminal Court. So we're representing the victims directly. We're bringing them. We filed the first complaint to the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan. Our action actively bringing the victims from November 2023 until today was recognized by the pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court with the only arrest warrant against Hamas. Even Israel hasn't issued an arrest warrant today, but of course, till today, but of course they will. So the International Criminal Court on the 20th of November issued an arrest warrant
Wait, wait.
directly against Mohammed Deif.
2023 or 2024?
Sorry, 20th November 2024, issued after a year of direct action, continuous action, daily, day and night, we're working on this. They issued an arrest warrant, recognized against Mohammed Deif, who we know now is dead. Israel said it from the beginning, and Hamas recognized this only after the ceasefire. The important is it recognized Hamas attacks of October 7 as extermination, torture, rape, other sexual crimes, and inhumane acts, recognize this as crimes against humanity and war crimes. This is tremendous. It's still not enough, and we're continuing so that there's other arrest warrants against all the indirect perpetrators, including Shiri, for example, the Bibas family murderers or Shani Luke's murderers, or, all these victims who, unfortunately, we all know very well. They've entered our collective memory. And we want arrest warrants against these perpetrators, not only those who actually, the direct perpetrators, those who murdered and raped, but those who sent them, those who trained them, those who encouraged them, those who indoctrinated them and financed them. So that's what we're aiming at, and that's a major milestone. 20th of November 2024, we have this one arrest warrant, and we're working globally to have dozens of arrest warrants. So that's the criminal proceedings. We're also on the criminal proceedings, we're also cooperating with national authorities from those countries I told you, Phyllis, who don't give an independent place for victims. So the US and Israel and the UK, Australia, because we're representing victims of those nationalities and we can bring forth their stories and their voices. That's the criminal lawsuits. The civil lawsuits is in Israel and the US for Israeli citizens and for US citizens going against states supporting terrorism, like Iran, Syria, and others, going against corporations that financed these atrocities. They did it um, knowingly, even though regardless of whether they share a terrorist ideology, they bear a responsibility because under compliance rules of where money goes, you know. And we filed the complaint against UNRWA, and we're going, of course, against individuals. So corporate entities who financed and the states supporting terrorism with two objectives. One, taking frozen sanctioned money and bringing them directly to victims so that they don't get lost in state treasuries. Two, taking money that is terrorist money, that is not frozen yet, taking it from that economic stream, including crypto and alternative mechanisms now that go under the radar, and taking them away from terrorism and directly to victims.
So tell us a little more about UNRWA. What do you hope to achieve? Because UNRWA is something that United Nations Relief and the official name is.
United Nations Relief Agency. It was established before the UN High Commissioner for Refugees became the agency for all refugees. And so it was established to provide relief for Palestinian refugees. Initially, it's not supposed to be an agency providing recognition of status, but providing relief to people. And so initially it was established to protect around 800,000 Palestinian refugees as a result of Israeli-Arab wars in the 40s and the 60s. And of course, we know that there were around 800,000 Jewish Jews who were refugees from Arab states, from Iraq, from Egypt, from Syria. I mean, you know, there's no Jews in these countries anymore, or barely so. They
I
were all
wait,
refugees.
repeat. I think you need to repeat it. Many people do not know how many
Uh,
Jews were kicked out of those countries.
Around 800,000 through as a result, direct result of Israel-Arab wars and the creation of the State of Israel. Many Arab states at the time who either protected their Jews or, you know, sometimes they were pogroms or not, just like in other European countries. They rejected their Jews or they imprisoned them. Jews became they persecuted them. Jews became suspects just because they were born Jews. At the time, it was either if you're a Jew, you're either a communist, you go to prison, or you are a Zionist, you go to prison. It was a crime, for example, in Syria, and people went to prison. And of course, this is not prisons like we would like to have in democratic countries. This was torture. This was no communication for the families, arbitrary executions, and so forth. So there was severe persecution of Jews in Arab states as a result of Arab nationalism that was very strong at the time. We're talking the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so forth, of course, unfortunately. Not all Arab countries today, you know, are more moderate, some have changed. Anyways, this is how UNRWA was created, with Arab states perpetuating the situation of refugeehood of Palestinians instead of giving them status for them to really build their lives like Israel gave to the Arab countries refugees of Jewish origin. Um, So, this is a cynical use or instrumentalization of Palestinian refugees. My heart goes out to them. These were about 800,000. Today, UNRWA counts 4 million refugees. So there's no other situation in the world where refugees grow or it's an inherited situation. Nevertheless, this has nothing to do with the lawsuit. And I would have preferred that we didn't have to file this lawsuit. I'm speaking very frankly here. I believe we filed this lawsuit out of the 101 plaintiffs. October 7 Justice Without Borders is representing 29 of the plaintiffs. And we joined this lawsuit with our partners, Law, who are doing terrific work, and their partners, their US partners, because after we've read the legal basis, the factual basis, and unfortunately, we are convinced that this lawsuit has to be filed. This is actually action that the UN should have taken because the UN was established. It was established to preserve human rights and for never again. And what we have is an agency that was kidnapped by a terrorist organization, not since today, for decades ago. It does give relief to Palestinians, but it gives them relief as a monopoly. That shouldn't happen either. It's as if UNRWA actually occupies Gaza or other places. Where are other UN agencies? Why everywhere in the world there are, a multiplicity like UNICEF or organizations for women rights and everything. So UNRWA is specifically based today in Gaza, not only, but in Gaza. And Hamas has taken over in 2005 when Hamas took power over the Gaza Strip through elections. The
Okay,
last
wait, let's just
election
remind everyone Israel totally left the Gaza Strip in 2005. My husband and I were actually at the south of Israel, though, right when all the Israelis were being, troops went down and brought all the people out. So every time anyone talks about if your kids are at college and they say, end the occupation, Israel has not occupied Gaza since 2005 until Gaza's Hamas attacked on October 7th. And then it's a
that is
defensive war.
That is correct. Israel disengaged physically, boots on the ground. There's no more boots on the ground, and that is the major one of out of the three tests in law, in occupation law to test if there's occupation. That is the most effective one. Are there boots on the ground? Nevertheless, we have to be fair. Israel, how do you say, preserved control of the borders, so the land border, the air border, the maritime border. And there is another border controlled by Egypt in the Rafah. So Egypt is also controlling a border. Um, and yes, and there's an accord called the Rafah Accords between the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, Israel, and the EU in order to keep these borders safe. When Hamas gained power, it started acting violently, executing whoever was perceived as political opposition to Hamas in Gaza streets. And EUBAM, which was EUBAM, which was the organization from the EU to monitor the Rafah Accords, exited Gaza. It couldn't operate anymore safely because of Hamas, and it came to Israeli shores, to Ashkelon, so inside Israel territory. And actually, now, when Israel is disengaging from Rafah under the ceasefire, the parties called for the renewal of the Rafah Accords. We'll see what will happen there. But this was the disengagement in 2005. You are correct, Phyllis. Israel maintained control over the borders and over the civil registry. So whoever is born, whoever is dead, and so forth. In terms of security, this was the state of Israel's um, sort of interest to maintain this. However, yeah, it's not occupation, meaning anything in the civil life, except for exiting borders, which of course is controlling, right? The people who can exit, who cannot. But anything that happened within Gaza had nothing, Israel had zero control over. So what are the educational books? What are the roads that are built or aren't built? How are resources used? If there's a car accident, what police do you go to? And so all this is controlled by Hamas since 2005. In the last elections ever, the first and last elections ever to be held in Gaza. Um, UNRWA is controlling it. Why do we go after them in a lawsuit? So I'm saying this with a heavy heart, but a very convinced and committed heart. We're doing what the UN should have done, because unfortunately, I am convinced, seeing that Hamas headquarters, UNRWA headquarters were used for Hamas headquarters. There is not even one UNRWA school without Hamas presence in it, used by Hamas. We know about the teachers and directors, school directors who, um, how do you say, who praised the attacks, who praised terrorism. We know about the educational books. We also know, and this includes clients, my clients at October 7 Justice Without Borders, UNRWA workers and teachers and professors there, they held children hostages. And
Wait, wait.
another
You mean Jewish children or held?
Israeli children, yes, Israeli children were held hostage by teachers, by UNRWA teachers in Gaza.
So they were
And
more than
money,
complicit.
there's exactly, it's not only complicit, it's actually taking a direct part. So did the organization know? Did it have to know? Was it supposed to know? And were the heads of the organization, did they know and did they have to know? And I was convinced that they had to know because in 2015, the UN Secretary General had an inquiry on UNRWA and Hamas because of 2014 war in Gaza. And there was a UN Secretary General letter, um, sort of alerting, in terms of risk management, alerting UNRWA and chiefs of UNRWA that Hamas has infiltrated the organization and they must act. Instead of acting and asking for help, they maintained a 10-year monopoly over humanitarian aid, including during October 7 war. We didn't see children being evacuated to safe places. We didn't see Arab countries opening their borders for these women and children. And I say this with a grave heart because I suffer also for the civilians who suffered tremendously, just like we're suffering.
Is there anything that our listeners can do to help with your projects?
Well, we're leading this unmatched legal front. We're doing something that the state cannot do because the state cannot represent victims. It can investigate and prosecute, and the state is dealing with its own. There's war, there's hostages to release. We're still in a state of emergency. So we're doing what they cannot in the names of direct victims. We're serving no other interest than the victims. What can our listeners do? They can support us. They can go to our website, october7justice.org. They can go to CauseMatch, to our donors page and campaign, and to provide a tax deductible, U.S. deductible donation. Any sum counts. We're totally independent. We're non-political. We go by universal values in the name of unconditional humanity. That's our hashtag, unconditional humanity. What we expect from ourselves, we expect from the world. And I think we're doing something very important. And I think our action touches many lives. And I think many people want to help us. And they need to understand, they can understand that any sum supports us. It's really beneficial for us. It helps us bring the best investigators. It helps us communicate with the victims directly so that they know what we're doing. It helps us go to it helps us go to The Hague, to Germany. It helps us do our work day and night. This is what we're devoted to for over 500 days. We still have hostages in Gaza. We're working also for their release behind the scenes. We really protect the victims. In the front, we put only those who wish to be put in the front, like Shani Look's family, and also those whose lives are not in danger. So the hostages we represent is totally confidential. We're waiting for all of them to come back. And we stand by all the victims, all the survivors. so they can rebuild their lives. And you can make a difference. You can enter the website october7justice.org. You can enter our cause match page O7J, and you can make a donation to help
And
us
I'll
do what
carry
we're
that
doing.
URL underneath the description. But what about lawyers? Do you need lawyers to volunteer, for
It's
example?
very actually I've had numerous lawyers want to help us. We have partners we have amazing partners, very devoted, very experienced, who are working in the jurisdictions in Germany, in France, in the US, in other places, in the UK. It's very difficult to, we have stable partners. It's very difficult to receive volunteers on sensitive issues because this is sort of entering very sensitive information belonging to victims. However, people can volunteer in terms of if you're an editor, like a language editor, or if you know how to manage social media, that's something, our outreach. If you can organize an outreach event so that your community can know more about our action, or a fundraiser for us, and we'll get there. We can get there and come physically and meet the community. I'm traveling to New York in March. We're traveling to other places. We often we're in Europe, we're in the US, we're in other places. So you can reach out and you can say, I would like my community to know about your work. How can I um, tell more people and bring them the message of your action because I believe in it or because I think it's important and I want more people to know about it.
I'm going to repeat what she said. She said it very well. But someone just asked me the other day, excuse me, about people who feel helpless and what can they do. So I think what you said about bringing an event, even if your organization doesn't have money to fly someone in, just doing a Zoom event featuring October 7th Justice could be very important both for the organization, the victims, but also for people in your community feeling that they're doing something because we all feel so helpless. So that's why I wanted to emphasize again that this, besides just giving money, I always feel money is good, but that people's own involvement in some way gives them both a sense of doing something and just spreading the word. So I would
Absolutely, Phyllis. Thank you so much for stating that, and actually it can't be emphasized enough. I have people, amazing lights, really. I call every person I speak to a light since that, horrific, very dark day. I have encountered thousands of people reach out daily to say what you're doing is amazing. Keep up the good work. You're doing something so important. And that's why I'm convinced that what we're doing, well, I know that because of the people reaching out. So please do reach out if you believe in our action. Engage. We build partnerships. We love to sort of recognize someone who believes in our cause and share information about our action. If you want to sign up to our newsletter, for example, it's very important for us. And the second thing, we receive our strength also, well, of course, from our set of beliefs, but mainly, I'll tell you, I don't know if it's going to surprise you or not, but from the victims themselves. I'd like to, if you allow me, Phyllis, to maybe end with an anecdote that happened recently. A phone
absolutely.
call, a phone call I received several days ago from the most surprising phone call. And on my phone, I saw a person I've been representing for so many days. She's a wonderful human being. She was at in one of the kibbutzes in the attacks, and one of her, closest family, in order to preserve his identity, I won't,
Of course, of
forgive
course,
me
of
for
course.
being a bit vague, but, first circle, family circle, and he was released in the past, since the current ceasefire. And he came out in very bad shape, just like all of the hostages who were released around 500 days after the attacks, kept in tunnels and starved and so forth. And I see her name. I answer immediately. I know they're at the hospital and hello, how are you? And she says, I just want to tell you I love you and I want you. And I'll call him El. El wants to speak to you. And for me, the world stopped. And that's El wants to speak to you. And so I'm listening, and then I hear his voice for the first time. I've never even heard the intonation of his voice. I've been representing him for about 500 days without him knowing I even exist. And suddenly he's on the other side of the phone, of the line. And he says, so I understand you're representing me at The Hague, at the International Criminal Court. I said, El, I represent you at The Hague, in Germany, in France, in UK, in Israel, in the US, anywhere you want. But the most important thing is that it happens when you want it and in the way you'd like it, and when you're ready. And he paused for just a second, a split second, and then his voice, crystal clear, says, I am ready. And wow, I've been walking with his message. It's like I'm walking on sunshine. There's a song like that, right? Walking on sunshine. Well, I've been walking on that sunshine thanks to his commitment. He is solid. Um, and while I can, frankly share, I was trembling, just physically trembling, just at the sound of his voice. But his voice is so solid, it gave me strength as well.
Thank you so much for sharing the anecdote. That's a wonderful way to end this show. I thank you, thank you, thank you for coming on. I thank our listeners. For those of
Thank you for
you
having me, Phyllis. Thank you for having me.
who want to know more about Evelyn and myself and our work, go to Never Again Is Now podcast at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And also, as we end every show, we say, please speak up against anti Semitism and all hate.